Listen, nobody's ahead and nobody's behind. Every single company that I'm speaking to has about 1 to 5 use cases live, and they have 100 that are on the docket. And you have to imagine that it's roughly 1997 in the internet. In 1997, it was MSN and America Online, and people thought that those two platforms were going to control the world.
Welcome to How AI Happens, a podcast where experts explain their work at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence. You'll hear from AI researchers, data scientists, and machine learning engineers as they get technical about the most exciting developments in their field and the challenges they're facing along the way. I'm your host, Rob Stevenson, and we're about to learn how AI happens. All right, podcast land, welcome back to How AI Happens. I have another fantastic guest lined up for you today. He is the Global VP of AI Business and AI Engineering over at Google. Ever heard of it? Philip Moyer is his name. Philip, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Rob. Thank you so much for having me.
Just a moment ago, I just double-checked your title, and we had a good chuckle about how, the more senior you get, the less we tend to care about titles. And you quipped that titles and jokes don't get more interesting the more that you speak about. So maybe we should just sprint through this and not talk about what you do. But I guess just to introduce you to the audience a little bit and understand more about who you are and what you're working on. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your current role and kind of how you got there?
Sure. So I'm part of the Google's AI engineering teams. And what I do is I have a team of black belts that work with some of the largest customers in the world. And then I work as well on commercial strategies for our AI business.
So that takes a lot of shapes, I imagine. But you recently wrapped up this worldwide Gen AI listening tour, for lack of a better term. I don't think that was an official trademarked t-shirt with tour dates on it or anything. But it sounds like you were just kind of taking stock of how Google's customers are intending to use Gen AI. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. I got an opportunity last year from roughly about end of March to December to talk to 371 customers in 15 countries and 5 different continents. So I got a really incredible opportunity to understand how people are thinking about AI, how they're using AI, their hopes, their concerns, the opportunities, the problems with this generation of generative AI.
Interesting. I want to ask a very vague question, what did you learn? But I guess I should be a little more specific. First, when I looked to understand who are the customers, what size companies and who are these individuals that you're surveying?
It's been incredible because I've had an opportunity to meet everything from startups, some of the biggest unicorns that are out there, some organizations that are just starting to build applications using generative AI, to some of the biggest companies in the world. Carrefour is a great example that I spent some time with over in France. Organizations like Verizon here in the United States. Organizations like Woolworth down in Australia. A lot of the luxury brands over in Europe. A lot of the manufacturing organizations over in Southeast Asia, some of the conglomerates. And then as well, a lot of the governments. What's been so incredible to me is how forward-thinking a lot of governments are on this topic, and their understanding of the need to be able to make sure that both their citizens as well as their businesses make the best use of artificial intelligence.
When you say best use, does this mean they are actioned to use it for business gains, or are we talking about accountability? What is their concern?
It's really interesting. I spent a lot of time on this topic last year around the risks and the opportunities of AI and what needs to be managed. Well, I call it kind of the management framework of AI. It's everything from the building of the models, the training of the models, and the use of the models. There are risks and opportunities in each one of the areas. As you can imagine, a lot of the press that's out there today is around things like copyrights that go into the building of the models. But when you're building those models, it's equally important to understand who's building them, what's the provenance of the information, what's the freshness of the information, what's the accuracy of that information. Are you doing it based on an average amount of information on the internet or the information that's behind your paywall or firewall? And so that building of the models and the tight coupling with GPUs and TPUs and the sustainability around that, there's a whole variety of risks and opportunities in that building space. In the training space, increasingly, I think that organizations are going to want to understand who's training a model inside of their organization. Are they poisoning the model? Can you have an insider threat to a model where I can train a model that says the bank's customer service phone number is my phone number? When you do healthcare, like when we released MedPalm here at Google, we had to have a diversity of training clinician types. So nurses, doctors, researchers, we had to have a wide diversity of patient types to understand, is this answer giving the right kind of an answer answer for this type of population. And then as well, we had to have a whole variety of work that went into what's called adversarial datasets, like asking these models some of the most awful questions you could imagine. And then in the usage of AI, what people are finding is if they use the wrong model, it can be super expensive. Like if you're supporting millions of customers with really large models, these things can get expensive very quickly. When you're using these models, you have to worry about, can certain people inside of your company ask certain questions of certain models? So you might not want certain people to be able to ask questions of your contract, your contracting AI software or model or your HR model. So model creation, model training, and model use, everyone from governments and companies around the world are recognizing there's both risks and also requirements that you need to manage.
When you speak of adversarial datasets, do you just mean like you're trying to anticipate how someone might use this stuff for evil? Like, how can this be misused? And let's not just wait to find out. Let's try and do some defense before that happens.
Yeah, increasingly, I think that your adversarial data set is going to need to be audited. Gemini, the really large multimodal model we just released, we're super proud of the work that we did to have third parties actually audit our adversarial data set. An adversarial data question would be, hey, teach me how to build a bomb. That's where, you go right away, do something violent or do something illegal or do something that's going to influence, like push out false information as an example, or deep fakes. That's what we call our adversarial data set. When you are throwing these questions in the training process and making sure that the model doesn't respond to those kind of questions, that they basically decline to answer the question or they decline to, to be involved in any kind of information exchange related to that kind of content.
Right. And it says like the how to build a bomb example is a good one, but it says can also be as low stakes as just like you mentioned something about HR policy or something about, like I shouldn't be able to ask my company co-pilot LLM, right, chatbot, whatever, to, hey, how much does so-and-so make, right? Or what are the details of this contract with this customer? Things as low stakes as that.
Great examples, in the healthcare space, if you want to say, hey, does this individual have a following genetic condition? Generally, a model will say, I can't answer that. But if you say, what's the dosage of this individual's medication? You can infer a genetic condition. And so it's something as nuanced as that. And one of the challenges I think people are realizing is that unstructured content is just that, unstructured. Like we've done a lot of really good work in enterprise technology of securing row and column level data. So you can say, like an organization like a Citi or JP Morgan, the investment bank can't ask the wealth management corpus of data any kind of information. And we've been able to secure that, and it's really well structured. When all of a sudden you ingest a whole bunch of investment banking reports or a whole bunch of wealth management reports that are unstructured in the form of just content, documents, we don't have good structure, like good row level column, kind of like in a contract. I can't say you can't ask a question of this section of the contract. That's still hard. And in generative AI, it's all or nothing right now. Either you ingest the whole contract or you don't. And so I would just say that some of these things, I think people are kind of waking up to these, like, how do I control the model from doing things it's not supposed to? How do I control usage? How do I actually audit the questions that are asked of a model? Just think about the auditability of the security of most large companies. You can see where people log in from. You can see what people are doing. And they do that to kind of secure the perimeter and secure the content of the information. Right now, we don't have a lot of auditability of these models. And so in highly regulated industries, starting to see a lot of activity as it relates to the auditability, the transparency, the adversarial data sets associated with the use and training of these models.
When you think of adversarial data sets vary tremendously industry to industry, like that question, what is so-and-so's dosage of medication is a good example for healthcare, but not relevant to a self-driving car company. But there's something equally adversarial you would need to plan for. So how much of this responsibility is Google's and how much of it is the companies deploying the technology, or do you view it as both?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, Google, what we do is that we rate every single question and answer that goes into a model against roughly about 16 different things. So we actually give a rating, a numerical rating of saying this is hate speech, this is toxicity, this is violent speech, this is obscenity. And every time we implement a language, we are on a road to implement approximately 133 languages. So we have had 33 available, and we're in the process of releasing over 100 right now. Every single time we do a language, we actually rate in that language against those 16 items. So is this obscene in Korean? Is this hate speech in Japanese? Is this toxic in French? So we actually give that rating and we reveal that rating to users. So if they decide they want to have a higher bar for what questions or answers are going to be answered, they can do that. We will not answer questions above a certain level of toxicity or hate speech or otherwise. And so it definitely is a shared responsibility model where we're doing our best around some broad categories, and then domain by domain and use case by use case, companies are going to have to implement that genetic profile as an example, or in their contracting process, they can't, implement. So we'll do some of it and customers will do some.
Gotcha. So there's a certain amount of it off the shelf that Google provides, but then there's also, here are the settings, right? Here's the threshold for what we consider obscene, which, is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. And then at the extreme level, there's just like, hey, you can't use this for this. I don't care who you are. And then it's just up to the individuals, the companies, to whatever is specific to them in their domain. That's now your responsibility.
Think about a gaming company versus a healthcare company, like the makers of Call of Duty or Fortnite. You're going to have a lot of violent speech in and around that topic, but you don't want that same level of violent speech in a healthcare setting, as an example, or in a financial services setting, or in some other settings. So yeah, it really will be controlled. We'll provide tools. And then the users will implement based on those tools. Like one of the really interesting things that I think is an interesting emergence right now is a concept that we call a model card. It's a metadata specification around our models. And so we say, hey, this is when the model was trained. This is the safety harness that we have. This is the adversarial data set. This is the what we've used to be able to do an adversarial data set. This is the freshness of the model as an example. And increasingly, we build in some technology so that any model that you're running inside of our Vertex platform, I can say, what's the freshness of this model? What's the safety harness? And so we built this like a data spec. I know that organizations like OpenAI and Microsoft are doing the same thing. Hugging Face are doing the same things. I think that we will converge on an industry data specification that says this is the provenance of the information that's in this model. And this is the provenance of the safety harness that's in the model. And that's going to be important. And so I think most regulated entities are going to need to register the models that run inside of their organization so they can say, this is a registered model or this is an unregistered model. We might not want to run unregistered models because it doesn't have the transparency you need to know that it's safe.
Register with whom? The government?
Nope, register with the company. In the same way, in large organizations, there's been this long-standing technology called a CMDB, which is a configuration management database, where if you're JP Morgan, as an example, and you have thousands of applications that are running, you need to know what software is running in your environment. So it needs to get registered somewhere that it's actually running. It's a valid set of code that's running on people's desktops, as an example. And so most large organizations have a notion of the software that's been registered and valid to run in their environment, and then the software that's not allowed to, especially in like regulated entities or government entities. The software that's running in your environment. And so you'll know the models that are running in your environment as well. But I think people will expect that you register, like with the corporate IT department, that I'm going to run this model. And so that they know there's not something rogue that's running in their environment.
Okay. It's almost like HR compliance at that point, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, as a large company, you don't want bad models running in your environment. So you got to have something that says what's a known model and what's an unknown model.
Right. So you got to go on this listening tour and survey companies of just about every size, probably tons of different use cases. I'm curious what kind of common threads you were finding. What were some of the challenges that kept coming up over and over again that you were hearing, even regardless of company size or industry?
Early on, it was understanding what is generative AI. Is this thing explainable? Is it transparency? Is it something that's going to give us unintended consequences? And I would say really in the springtime of last year, I spent a huge portion of my time kind of explaining what is generative AI. Then we started getting into the era of security, because if you recall back in that time period, most people were using consumer grade AI, where I had one company over in Germany tell me that they were a toy manufacturer and they pushed their price list into one of the big public models. And you could ask the model, what's the profit margin they're making on every toy? And so then it got into this, like, how do I secure my information and don't let Google or Microsoft or, Anthropic or otherwise steal all my IP? So then we got into the security phase. And I spent a lot of time explaining we use what's called an adapter layer, which allows you to maintain all the training in a secure layer inside of your Google tenant that only you control. And Google doesn't know what's inside of it, as an example. And so I got from what is generative AI to how do I secure the AI. And then very quickly, I would tell you, as I got into into the fall time period, it was a lot around how do I start my first use case in an unregrettable way. Now, you've seen all like the scary stuff that comes out, like generative AI can make up medicines. It can take two Latin words, put it together and say, you should treat this with this medicine, and it doesn't exist on the planet Earth. So people were like, how do I pick something that I'm not going to regret doing? And so it was kind of, how do I get that first thing started? And then as I got into the later fall, I had a lot of people saying to me, and this was lots of boards of directors. They were like, oh my God, who's ahead in this space? Is my competitor outflanking me? And how do I scale this? How do I do this at scale? Because I have hundreds and hundreds of ideas, but oh my God, like all the things we just talked about, around model building and training and usage, people were starting to discover, they're like, oh my God, this is going to be hard to scale. So everyone was worried about who's ahead. And in the fall, I had to tell a lot of boards of directors, I said to them, listen, nobody's ahead and nobody's behind. Every single company that I'm speaking to has about 1 to 5 use cases live, and they have 100 that are on the docket. And you have to imagine that it's roughly 1997 in the internet. In 1997, it was MSN and America Online, and people thought that those two platforms were going to control the world at the time.
Wow. I haven't heard MSN in years. That's such a throwback.
Yeah. And so I was at Microsoft at the time, and I said, it feels exactly like 1997. And Amazon hasn't been born, and Google hasn't been born, and eBay hasn't been born, and all these wonderful companies, and Yelp and Uber and everybody else has yet to be born. And so just recognize that we're in 1997, and we are every company I talk to has 100 use cases they want to do, and they're trying to figure out how to do this at scale. And so that's really where we're at right now. I think that 2024 is going to be a lot about how do we scale doing accurate and safe AI for the enterprise? Like, how do we do it at scale?
It's so interesting that people are terrified that they're like falling behind. And you basically have to tell them that you're all at the same stage, or also that the idea of it being a race is irrelevant. It sounds like that's kind of the very non-technical therapy you're giving these people.
It is. And I have to tell you, it's consistent. It's financial services. It's healthcare. It's retail. It's luxury brands. It's gaming companies. I mean, literally, all of us are facing the exact same challenges right now of doing this at scale.
So when you speak of doing it at scale, this is the concern for all these companies who have between 1 and 5 live and 95 others that they would like to. So how is Google actioned to help them deploy generative in the enterprise at scale?
So I tell everyone that we're on a journey, we being the whole industry, on a journey to rewrite the entire computing stack. So there's a whole brand new layer of silicon that has to be put down around the world. Then there's a new class of software. It's called foundation models. There's a new set of management tools that you have to do LM operations at scale, like things like prompt management at scale. There's a new storage algorithm. It's called a vector store that you're going to see people have to vectorize their contracts and their HR records and their data sets. And so brand new storage algorithms called vectorization. And then there's applications. If you rewrite the silicon and rewrite the management tools and rewrite the storage algorithm, and you have this new class of software called models, you're going to rewrite every piece of software that's out there to use generative AI, to be able to give natural language interfaces. And so what Google is doing is that we are providing technologies at every single layer. So we are a proud partner of NVIDIA, and we also have our own TPUs. So we have GPUs and TPUs, and we have a carbon neutral footprint around the world because these models consume huge amounts of power. And so that sustainable layer of silicon, we're deploying it around the world in GPUs and TPUs. We're both providing our own models, things like Gemini, big multimodal model, Palm and Cody, as well as we provide over 130 other third-party models. And so we're making sure there's a big ecosystem of models that you can pick the right model for the right job. We have a set of tools called Vertex that help you do LM operations, things like prompt management and embeddings and fine-tuning and reinforcement learning with human feedback tuning. And then we also have tech tools that make it really, really easy for you to vectorize your content. We have a thing called enterprise search where I can just throw all my contracts in it and answer questions just on that contract database. Or I can throw, a whole bunch of data in it for my customer service department, and it doesn't go off and hallucinate. It just answers questions from that content. And then we're also building a set of applications. Obviously, our workspace products, we're adding Duet. We're adding this capability to all of our workspace products. We built one that's called an anti-money laundering tool that actually actually helps you like eliminate false positives and more accurately identify anti-money laundering. We have contact center applications. So Google is providing technologies at every layer in this rewrite of the stack.
Why do you suppose that the stack needs to be rewritten rather than just put another couple Jenga blocks at a 90-degree angle on the top of the stack?
Most of the world, like when you think about like the data lake houses and the data warehouses and the data, pick your favorite metaphor for data, you're trying to pour things into these KPIs and these dashboards, these beautiful dashboards. And now I'm able to ask questions like, is there an invoice that looks like this that we've ever paid in the past? And that question is really hard for a structured store to answer. Generative is great at that because it can say, oh, you know what? This invoice seems to have 3 things that were delivered on the exact same date as the following things over here. The exact same product description, the exact same location, the exact same size, and the exact same quantity. That's something that doesn't exist in an application today. Like it doesn't go to that level. Or I can say, does this invoice match the contract? Like extraordinarily difficult thing inside of the retail industry when you have 20 drills show up as opposed to the 100 that you ordered, but these are 20 higher quality drills. Like how do I even associate that with the contract? And in the contract it says, equal or greater product I can deliver to you. So is this an equal or greater product? So the things that we can do with generative AI, there's a whole new class of applications that we can reason with in a way where in the past databases were it was very binary. Either the number was or wasn't. With generative AI, you can have the application layer do reasoning that you couldn't do in the past. I used an example of, I took an image of store shelves with lots of chips on it. I threw it into our Gemini model and I said, hey, what are the names of the chips on the 3rd row? And are any bags missing? Now design a bag of chips that would stand out from all these other chips. And the model did all of those things. It actually counted roughly the numbers that were missing. It had the exact names. And then it actually created a net new product. It helped me be creative. You can't do that with databases. And most of our applications have been built on these like highly structured stores with highly structured dashboards. And so when you have that, now it's like introducing a new employee into your environment. It has the ability to reason and be creative and do rote work, like looking at counting bags of chips that you would have to send somebody in to do. And all of that stuff our existing application layers don't do. And so you want to integrate that. You want to integrate that into all the applications that you have.
And does that all need to be trained on a company's proprietary data?
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why I tell people that we spent most of the 90s putting things into databases. And then we spent most of the late 90s and early 2000s putting an HTML interface on and then a mobile interface. And now we're about to go through what I call the vectorization of information, of knowledge inside of companies. We're going to vectorize the customer service department. We're going to vectorize the contract database. We're going to vectorize our merchandising strategy. So vectorization, it's going to be done on the company's data itself. So yes, absolutely. And the information that's the most highly curated is the information that's behind the firewalls and behind the paywalls. Like think about Bloomberg as an example. Bloomberg, I think on their website, they said they have something like on the order of like 100 petabytes of information that's been curated. And they have really extraordinary information. They have news broadcasts. They have information around discounted cash flow. They have information around private assets that they've curated. Moody's is the same way, where they have provenance of every single company for 475 million companies. They can tell you who the ownership structure is based on the curated information they did. And so that information needs to be put into a mechanism, into kind of vectorization where you can now ask questions and ask that information to reason using these generative AI models. And so I expect that most companies are going to vectorize their company level information. They'll vectorize their division level information, and then even employees will even have their own AI models that kind of follow them professionally inside of the company and just as a professional throughout their career. And so I think we'll get AI to be extremely personalized as well. So we'll all have models.
Surely auditability gets a little more complicated with the vectorization process, no?
Yeah, it does. That comes back to our original conversation, is that as you're training that model, who's doing the training inside of your company? What questions are they asking of it? What are the questions that people are actually asking? So if I say, should I extend credit to this company or should I extend credit to this individual? that needs to be auditable in the same way that it can be audited today in a normal lending process. Regulators will come in and say, show me your risk tables, show me how you make decisions on these particular credits. You're going to need to audit the models as they make decisions on credit, or as they make recommendations on care, or as they make recommendations on things like PII data for personalization, if it's in something like media or it's in something like retail. So yes, you'll need auditability of that, both the questions, the answers, as well as the training.
Gotcha. Well, Philip, this has been packed with information here, and we're creeping up on optimal podcast length. Before I let you go, though, I want to ask you kind of a big question, and I apologize for its vagueness, but what are you most excited about as you speak to all these companies who are presumably about to be deploying generative in lots of different use cases? What gets you truly excited?
I talk to a lot of board directors, and they'll say to me, how much more productive can my team be? I'll say to them, you should just make an assumption that you're going to be somewhere on the order of about 10 to 15% more productive with AI. We've had some statistics where we saw 6 to 11% increase in some of our software developers. We've worked on organizations that do marketing content platforms where they're able to create 15, 20% more marketing content. And that's interesting. The productivity is really important for a lot of organizations, and it's really going to do some wonderful things. But the ability to be able to increase proficiency for people in their job, in the education industry, we're seeing that you can bring somebody up to an average level of proficiency in about a third of the time that it would normally take. So if I have to train a customer service department, a new customer service rep, I can bring them up in a third of the time. So if it would take me 6 months, I can bring them up to speed in 2 months. That is amazing for things like job mobility, for people to be able to do more in their roles and be able to take on more for their company and go into a lot of interesting areas that maybe a company couldn't go into in the past. The third thing, though, that I get really excited is what we call job satisfaction. People that are using AI, on average, 85, 90% more satisfied with their job. And I tell people we have the opportunity to make work fun again, because AI can take away a lot of like that just really awful stuff like, oh, I'm putting out a marketing piece of content. Is it compliant? Am I violating any of our compliance standards? Or, oh, I'm doing anti-money laundering. I got to keep clearing. No, that wasn't money laundering. That wasn't money laundering. I got to keep clearing all these things. Or, oh my God, I'm producing marketing content. I have to take the same marketing content and put it out in 17 different languages and 5 different formats. And I got to reformat this content into 140 characters all these times. And so taking that rote stuff away, I get excited around proficiency and job satisfaction, because I really do think, like I said, we have an opportunity to make work fun again.
I love that you say that, because when people ask me, is AI coming for my job? And I usually tell them, no, it's coming for the parts of your job that you hate. So I'm glad to hear you validate that, because you would have a clearer idea of it than I would. That is really encouraging. Philip, this has been really, really great talking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your experience and wisdom with me today. I've loved chatting with you.
Absolutely, Rob. Thanks so much for having me.
How AI Happens is brought to you by Sama. Sama provides accurate data for ambitious AI, specializing in image, video, and sensor data annotation and validation for machine learning algorithms in industries such as transportation, retail, e-commerce, media, medtech, robotics, and agriculture. For more information, head to sama.com.